I'm here interviewing Norm Sawchyn, and it's his birthday, September 19th, 2017.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself as a filmmaker? When did you begin learning about film?
When did I begin learning about film?
Yeah.
In the early 70s. In fact, 69, I believe it was. I started going to Terry Marner's film appreciation class at the University of, actually the Regina campus, University of Saskatchewan Regina campus was what it was in the day before it became Regina. Anyway, so I started there and I got very interested in, and we did a little experimental film, a friend of mine and I did a little film for the class, and that hooked me right away. So I decided I wanted to go to Toronto and get into film school because there wasn't really anything here. So I went to Toronto and got a job, and by the time I finished the job in the fall, it dawned on me that, oh, I haven't registered at anything yet, so I better do that. So I went to York, and they said, well, you're a little late, duh. You better come back in January. Or if you register now, you can come in January. Meanwhile, I was running out of money, had no money, so I came back to Regina, all disheartened, and discovered that Jean Oser had been, since I was gone, had arrived in Regina, had been brought in to teach film appreciation classes and history classes. And I think the promise was down the road there might be some production classes. We got very excited about this, and it didn't take that long. Within a couple of years, we had an editing suite, you know, at the university with at least 3 upright moviolas, I believe it was, and lots of rewinds and, you know, that kind of thing. Anyway, so it was because of Jean Oser that I really started learning about film. He taught me everything I know about editing for sure, and just went from there. I fell in love with editing right off the bat. That was my favorite part of it, and just went from there.
Is there a particular story about his teaching, experience you might have had with him in the early days that you can recall?
Well, there are many stories, I suppose, many memories. But one thing I did want to mention was what really impressed me the most about Jean Oser was his absolute devotion and love for his wife, Ellen, whom he had brought with him to Regina, Saskatchewan, all the way from New York. And apparently she hated being here because it wasn't New York. And however, she was, and I'm sure most people know this, she was an invalid. She was very ill. She was bedridden pretty much all the time. So they had an apartment on Lawrence Street, and that's where she stayed. I mean, basically she lived in that apartment. She very rarely got out of bed. So his devotion to that woman was amazing to me. He would come, you know, teach a class in the morning, then he'd dash home, because it was only a few blocks away. He'd dash home for lunch, feed Ellen her lunch and take care of her. Then he'd come back for classes in the afternoon and then dash off home again and do the same thing. And then he would have evening classes where he'd come back and do these. So over time it got to be a lot of stress on him that way. So eventually what he decided to do was he would have his evening classes at home at his apartment. And that turned out to be the best ever because I was his assistant at the time. Brock Stevens and I were his assistant for a few years back in the early days, and that meant we did all the projecting and that kind of thing and setting up of things. So we had to set up a projector in his apartment and the screen and of course all that, so we did for these classes. And it was wonderful because he was able to bring Ellen out and set her on the couch. And now here's Ellen, who was this amazingly beautiful ex-ballerina, very high-class woman, very. She was sort of like a goddess or a princess or something, and most of the students, and especially the girls, I'll have to admit, would just fawn around her, sort of like she was giving court, and they were at her feet and they were at her side and they were all around her, and she just loved it. Of course, she just absolutely loved it. And of course, Jean was so proud. He was every time he'd be teaching us, he would be making comments to her, and she'd be making comments back to him. And sometimes you didn't even quite understand what they meant, but they were laughing and things. So it was obviously things that they had carried through their lives, and it was just, you could see the warm love between those two shine all the time, and it was just amazing. So some of my fondest memories of those evenings at Jean's place